Guru Sattanathan has been on the front lines of the event streaming revolution for a number of years now. And in that space, he's developed a perspective on really, I'd say, the evolution of data and application silos in enterprise IT. Sounds like a really subtle thing, but he's got this great perspective on kind of the phases that's gone through and how they lead inexorably to real-time analytics. Let's listen in as Guru explains his view of data history and, more important, the data present and future. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Real-Time Analytics Podcast. I am your host, Tim Berglund, and I'm delighted to be joined in the studio today by a longtime friend, past and current colleague, two separate companies, Guru Sattanathan. Guru, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim. It's really great to be here, and this is a topic that I've been thinking for quite a long time, and I'm so happy that I get to talk about this out in the world with you.
Yeah, I'm excited. But before we dive in, you work at StarTree as a product advocate. Now, that's not the same thing as a developer advocate. Tell us what a product advocate does. What are you up to?
Yeah. I think this is something that we very recently coined. Probably in the industry, we are the only ones doing it, or probably very few. So, developer advocates, you guys go to the broader audience in the developer community. You basically help them with the technology, help them progress, learn, all that. And there is, if you look at the other side of a product company, there are solution architects and teams who try to help, folks who want to purchase the product or build applications out of the product. But then we realize there is a community in between where they sign up for the product and they just want to have some fun or learn the technology. And also we felt that's a community who can actually help us with, giving us the right feedback to improve and all that. So product advocates basically help that small community to basically, progress with the POCs or collect product feedback and whatnot.
Cool. So you're kind of like in that broader product-led growth motion thing that people talk about these days. You're somebody to help along that journey for a complex piece of infrastructure like StarTree Cloud, things like this that takes some
Pretty
thinking.
Much.
Yeah. And that thinking, so obviously it takes some doing to make a distributed database work and succeed with building it into your life.
Yes.
But the thinking behind that is kind of, when you and I started talking, what got my interest about this idea of yours. And you're thinking about really the evolution of the enterprise data landscape. I've been spending a lot of time in the history of this young podcast, talking about history. It's a thing that maybe this is an age thing. I don't know. I've just been more interested recently, and I think it's important to help understand why real time is a thing now and why it matters. And you've got a different take on it than I've got. And I really would just like to turn it over to you. You've got this kind of 5-generation or 5-phase view. Take us through it, and I'll ask you questions as we go along.
Yes, sure, Tim. I think you're right. I think it's more of an history and age thing, to be honest. That actually changes the perspective on these stories. Thankfully, I was able to align myself to these 5 different stages that we're going to talk about with my own career progression. So it's basically, thankfully, I jumped to different jobs where, all fell into different silos. So I was able to see the difference. So I thought about, writing a blog on this particular topic, the topic of silos, from a long time. I think it was, 2017. I remember talking about this with one of those architects. But I could never complete the full picture, where this is leading. Obviously, we have been talking about AI for quite a long time. But then to paint a full picture end to end from the beginning days of software to how it is going to disrupt during the AI days, I always felt there is a missing piece in between. That's when I joined StarTree, when I got to know about Pinot, I felt, okay, this is the answer. I'm not trying to sell Pinot here. It's more of a very genuine realization of how people have thought about it, how this is kind of evolving from end to end. So in summary, this is a five-faced, history and the present and the future of this, how the software silos are evolving, basically.
So bring us to the beginning as you see it. Where do you see the enterprise data, enterprise IT really getting its start?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first one is really the app silos. I think at those days, I don't think people would have seen it as a silo. To be honest, that's when people actually used it. Started using software for business. It could be a very simple application on the web, or an on a POS terminal, for example,
Sure,
where you have
before the web, Visual Basic or some
yes,
dumb terminal thing, or sure.
pretty much. Um, I think that kind of evolved over a period of time where everyone started running their own applications, their own database, their own interface. And early days, because the scope for a software in a business is so small, it was a very simple architecture, probably a single tier, and a direct UI to a database connectivity, or probably like you say, maybe not even a database. Maybe it was running on a file system, and they were trying to capture data. I think when you kind of extrapolate that picture, it's pretty much disconnected applications, across the business. So, if a company was using software for, end user billing, and then if you kind of evolve that towards internal business applications, then you can kind of, start to extrapolate different type of applications within companies, but completely, disconnected, basically. Um, that's what I would put it, as an app silo, where, you know, generation one, of
So
software enterprise.
customer service is a phone bank, and people call a 1-800 number, and they are people with computers, and they're looking up a customer record, but that's the customer service version of the customer record, and their history of service calls. You may not necessarily know what they purchased or
Yes,
how they became customers or any of that kind of stuff. It's just that silo.
yes, pretty much. I think I can definitely say in the past, people were literally carrying files in a disk, probably to a different team, giving it over. So yeah,
Yeah, if the files were even in a format that was transportable, there would be some flat file export from the so-called database, and you might have to run custom code to import that because it was just whatever that programmer of that other system thought should be exported. There weren't necessarily, there were standard interchange file formats, but not it wasn't like everything was. There was no XML.
yes, this is exactly why this particular topic needs a podcast, or more brains into it, because as you can see, the imagination kind of expands, and when you think about this particular problem space.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the first generation. Is that customer service has got a departmental customer service database, and maybe it's the early '90s, and there's Windows and some Visual Basic application talking to some database on a server, but that's it, and it's in a silo. And there's lots of those, not just customer service. Every business unit has their own. So what's generation two?
I think before we go to generation two, there is one small improvement we did on the app silo space. That is to talk about the need for integration. I think that's where people very soon realize, oh, we have got to connect all of this in different applications. I can't carry files around the office, or different to
Right.
different stories. Um, that's where a lot of people connected applications directly. Like CRMs started talking to the marketing database, to HR department. They all connected everything. And if you kind of imagine that to let's say if we had 20 different databases in a large enterprise, the number of connections you can make is you can really make a mess out of it. I think
Yes.
that's where a lot of technologies came in to help in that space. That is, people call it SOA, enterprise service bus, event driven architecture, for example. I'm sure that's something you've spoken about in the past, back in Confluent days.
Yeah, kind of
Uh,
proto primordial pre event driven architecture, similar ideas, but it was a rough start. And those,
yes,
you say enterprise service bus, and anybody old enough to know what that means feels a little chill. It wasn't a technology that was broadly considered to be successful.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's good to have that picture in mind as we go to the next silo, that is basically the data silo. Um, Data silo is basically when people start to realize, oh, we are starting to collect a lot of data from these applications, and there are patterns. There are benefits to analyze it, so we can improve the business process, for example. Till then, pretty much people, you know, they were directly reading it from the application database. Today, if you if you want to do a CDC or do analytics on a OLTP database, from the app silo, the database will, the DBA will come and stand in front of you, ask you the
Yes.
question, what you're trying to
Yes.
do.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Um, Back in the days, it was not there. The volume was low and all that, but the need was rising. Basically, let's collect the data, then look at the patterns, let's crunch some numbers,
Yeah.
see what we can improve.
And that was in the early days. That was a batch process during off-cycle hours, where the transactional database could take the load of all of the reads happening that you're doing to incrementally pull out the transactions and ETL them off into the data warehouse, right? So
Yes.
you wouldn't do that live, yeah, because there wasn't bandwidth
Yes.
for it.
Yeah.
Or at
I
least
think,
there was fear that there wasn't bandwidth for it. There was probably bandwidth lying around, but it didn't
yes.
wasn't
I
a thing that
think
was
that
done.
is, that particular area itself, is something we should talk about. When you say batch, there's a lot of subtle background, behind that. First of all, why it became batch. I think that's where the priority comes in. The app silos for a very long time. I would say even until 2010, the app silos were treated as the business critical piece, for any company,
Mm-hmm.
because they're customer facing, critical. But when it comes to data, we always dumbed it down. Okay, write it somewhere. We'll take care of it. I think that's pretty much the story. I'm sure we all know of it. I think the reason why I want to stress about batch here is, there is a connection dot between that and the integration technologies I was talking about before. Which will help us talk about the different silos, that the different trends and the phases that we want to cover today.
Expand on that a little bit. I'm not that help me with that a little bit. I didn't not quite there yet. So give me that
Yeah.
again.
So if you look at, I'm sure you'd have you'd have heard of convergent evolution.
Yes.
Where
Yes. This thing is evolving.
birds.
This thing is evolving, and we have the same eye in 6 different animals. Yeah.
Yes, it's the same story here. With both the silos. If you look at the app silo, and this is when I was shifting to a different job from app silo to data silo. In a different company. What I notice, this is something I'm sure all of us have some thoughts about, is if you look at app silos and if you look at all the integration technologies and the event driven architecture, that kind of incubated those days. There's a lot of commonalities. For example, we move data, we build connectors, we do transformations, we do filtering, we do all sort of massaging, build that pipeline to get the data from one place to other. And if you look at the data silo, we pretty much have the same pattern. All the ETL technologies, data integration tools, it does exactly the same. The only difference, difference, and the reason why they couldn't converge those two competencies or the technologies is pretty much the latency. If you look at App Silo, they were heavily real time at those days. Payment transactions, for example, you buy something online, it is immediate. You get the confirmation straight away. Whereas the data integration, because of the batch notion, it was always very high latency data movement processes rather than integration jobs basically.
Yes, and that was I think both due to batch was the best we could do, just given the state of sort of the computational and network bandwidth we had available to us at the time. And also, I see this a lot, what I call artifact thinking. This is how we used to do it, and now we could. There's more computational and data transfer bandwidth available. We could do it differently, but we just think of it like we used to think of it because those are the patterns and habits and tools and traditions that kind of solidified in that context. Our technological context has changed, but we just kind of haven't freed our
Yes,
minds.
yes,
So
exactly. I
artifact
think
thinking, I think, is a nice way to say that.
yes, yeah, I would definitely document that. I'm this is the thing. You come up with um, the perspectives also evolves. It gets very mature. As we talk about this, I think that's probably where we also had the concept of big data. Probably 2014. If you look at it, there's massive hype around it, and that's probably where I also try to jump ships and okay, let's try something else. This is fascinating and all that. Um, you know, that was a phenomenal transformation in the industry when it comes to data processing. Probably the reason why we had to do that was volume or the variety of data and what we're going to do with it. That's where we started crunching this. Starting with Hadoop. For example, the data silo evolved pretty fast, but I would still say even though we developed a lot of computational efficiency to process data, we couldn't still make these two silos talk between each other. I think that kind of remained as a problem till the phase two, where while the data silo was pretty much evolving.
Yeah. So what phase in your mind, where's big data? How does big data fit into your phases, and what phase are we in right now?
I would say I think there's a lot of overlap between phases. Maybe I shouldn't call it a phase. It's more of a trend line.
Yeah.
In enterprise, software evolution.
And briefly, I'm interrupting you here now, but I mean the way I see big data and what was happening, and I see it starting around 2010, really starting to take hold, and certainly by 14, it was all anybody talked about. It wasn't really a different way of thinking about analytics. It was a different tool set because of what the web had done to volumes. You had now, because of the adoption of web, and at that time the increasing penetration and capability of mobile devices, you had more and more of our social and commercial lives were electronically mediated, and now there's data about them, and the tools that we had for doing analytics were not designed for that, right? So we had to build different systems. But again, due to this artifact thinking, it was still, all right, take all the stuff from there and put it over here and do stuff to it. That's a very unfair way to describe a data warehouse, but it's Hadoop too. It's the same thing. It's just a bigger over there. It's just more stuff, but it's still the same kind of idea. But
Yes.
keep us going. We got big data, and there's, I think what you're working towards is this idea of connectivity, right? You've got silos, data silos, and everybody's now aware that that's bad, and whole little sub industries emerged, like master data management, to try to deal with the problems in the silos, and that never really worked.
Yes.
But keep walking us through.
So if you look at the point of this particular blog or this particular topic is really, if you go to any enterprise architect in large companies, breaking silos is a very popular topic among them. How do I break the silo? They often crunch about this. We have been talking about this for probably 20 years now, and we couldn't break it. Even and my very strong opinion here is I don't think we'll ever break it. I don't think the software. I think the software silos are going to remain, but I see a shift in terms of how these silos are going to evolve and how they're going to be placed between each other. We spoke about breaking silos, and if you look at the current trend and the phase I'm talking about is probably 2.5ish to 3. Where this
Okay.
we have big data now. We want the silos are talking to each other. That means we are talking about integration right now. How you can feed in the analytics that you generate from the data silo, feed into the application teams, so you can enrich the customer experience, for example. Um, but as you move forward, and if you look at probably phase five, the last phase, I don't think we will need integration. We will get there, but I think it's going to completely shift. When it comes to how the silos are going to be placed.
And bring us all the way to the future. I mean, where this has been a batch world we've been talking about. Kind of wrapping up, how does real time fit into the
Yes.
direction that you see history taking?
Yes, I think there are probably three important inflection points that we need to talk about. One is now we have app silos, that are heavily real time, and we have the data silos that are heavily batch. Then you need something that's common between these two silos to transfer data. And obviously, we have done it in the past with FTP servers, S3 buckets, and all that. Staging data, between those two, silos. But then that's when one of the most fascinating things that that happened was Kafka. I don't know what really Jacobs and Neha and team and had in mind when they thought about Kafka. But for me, Kafka is that important bridge between the silos. For example, you publish data from an application silo, from any application for that matter. You want to expose that to an analytics engine or a data scientist. They are one another consumer. They can latch on the topic, consume the data, do whatever they want. I think Kafka. The reason why I call Kafka is phenomenal or fascinating is because before Kafka, we have attempted that with a lot of MQs, for example. Unfortunately, MQs were heavily in-memory driven. Democratizing the data to different consumers at the same time was tough. Then that's where Kafka coming with strong persistence it gave a lot of hope in terms of bridging the silos. And also, when I say persistence, it kind of gives you a hint of solving that latency issue. We have real time, we have batch. Okay, there is something going on here with persistence in Kafka. Okay, this is where I should be looking into to build a feedback loop, between these two silos. That's where I got fascinated. I was looking into the space. Very soon I realized it's not enough. Because now if you look at the first phase, we saw apps to be real time, data is batch. Then we are bringing Kafka into the picture. Kafka is obviously very real time. You can bring all the data from the silo, dump it in a topic, but then you then immediately realize all the destinations, the analytical destinations for Kafka, they're all batch again. So you're pretty much bringing everything so fast, and then you put a break and dump everything down to a batch system, and then you kind of again slowly process them. That's where you kind of lose the connection.
Yeah, like if all of your analytics, if all of your application transactional world were all Kafka, and then you Kafka connected everything into a data lake and ran batch jobs over that and for your analytics. That's artifact thinking, right? Why would you do that?
Yes. I think that's where to the point about artifact thinking, that's where it's very subtle and very nuanced, but I definitely think the enterprise architect should think about how this shift is happening when it comes to integration and when it comes to building an end-to-end feedback loop. For example, before I go there, let's talk about what is that, how to address this gap. Obviously, it's very visible in front of us. You need something that can process data in real time. Basically, you have the data in Kafka, you dump it somewhere. I should not actually use the word dump. It's you connect it to something that you connect it to something that can process data in with the speed of Kafka. That's where I started looking into Pinot.
Exactly.
The biggest reason why we started talking, joining StarTree and all that. I think pretty much if you go to the ultimate future, and if you talk about AI, and all of that, you cannot get there without fixing this real-time connectivity with processing. I think that's probably why I couldn't paint the full picture for quite a while now. Until I got exposed to Pino.
Mhm.
So basically, if you look at the evolution from top, from 1 to 5, um, you basically have to build a pipeline for your customer that starts with the real time experience or that ends with the real time experience. That is pretty much is what something like Pino is addressing. I think that kind of in a way breaks a silo. I'll talk about why it won't completely break the silo. That's a different problem to talk about. That is, but regardless, before we go there, phase 4 or the trend number 4 is basically introduction of Pino. Building real-time feedback loops, with your customer, and making your app silo and data silo, talk between each other, basically.
Okay. Okay. What is phase 5? Where do you see this going? Paint a little picture of the future for us.
Yeah, I think phase 5 is basically, uh, uh, the AI or the ML space evolving with broader maturity in the ecosystem. And to simply put, I would say what will happen in phase 5 is, instead of talking about integrating or breaking the silos, we will be looking at data silos literally swallowing the app silo. You can think of deploying your little app silos within data silos. Uh, I think that's what pretty much will happen. For example, if you look at today, already AI or data applications are helping monitor your logs and predict downtimes. For example, that's pretty much slowly data silo creeping into the application space, starting to dominate in the sense. I think integration is always going to be there, but it's going to be like more of a um, the baby kangaroo, sitting in the tummy. I think probably the mother kangaroo is basically going to be the data silo, carrying the app silo around.
You don't see a future where data silos are a thing of the past and comprehensively integrated. A little bit of pessimism there, or at least a not utopian vision. I think. Talk about that.
Yeah, maybe the word silo might fade away. I don't think um, it will stay as a silo. Um,
Yeah, it's a very judgy word,
um,
isn't it? It's yeah.
yes, yeah, maybe maybe we should come up with a different name there or a terminology there. But it will be a thing of the past where I still remember we were developing a microservice and there was a query that hits the database. So what we did was we went to the DBA of the data silo and we gave them the requirement, hey, can you write me a query, a SQL query? And they gave an optimized SQL query. We embedded that in the application. I think that will kind of go away in the sense there are different shifts that will happen. For example, from a skill point of view, um, people from application silo, they will now equip themselves in learning more about the data space technologies, be it writing SQL or developing machine learning model. I can already see that. Some of my friends in the Bay Area, a lot of them from the application silo are looking at getting into the job where they can spend some time with ML, for example. Those are some of the symptoms of that particular integration. What I mean by that is breaking the silo, or when it comes to all these silos, it's not just about technology. There's a lot of people dynamics as well. One of the reasons why we couldn't merge it is because um, you know it was too hard to manage the competencies. To train someone in developing a microservice as well as training them to develop a machine learning model, was not easy. So now that will block. I think you can pretty much just extrapolate, the Chat GPT, for example, the generative AI. 2 years down the line, probably developing a microservice to integrate applications is going to be a lot easier. You just give them the protocol credentials. Probably something will spin up the microservice, connect it. But then if you kind of take a step back and look at the process, it's literally that data silo creating that application for you. And also managing that application, for example, Kubernetes pods in the application silos today. Those will be heavily monitored by AI in the future in terms of log monitoring, uptime guarantees, and all of that. So that's what I talk about. I think there'll be a very intimate relationship between data silo and application silo. I should stop saying silo. I'm not able to think of an alternative word, but I think, but there will be separation in terms of more from a business discipline point of view. Business will still say, hey, these applications are business critical to me. Give me guarantees. Keep it clean and all of that. That way, there will be some separation. But the data space will pretty much engulf, or maybe that's where there's going to be a rise of these data apps, for example, which is going to serve the businesses directly rather than app silos being the front end of the business. That priority will basically shift.
My guest today has been Guru Sattanathan. Guru, thanks for being a part of the Real Time Analytics podcast.
Hey, thank you, Tom. It's great to be here.
And there you have it. If you feel compelled to help us spread the word and grow the Real Time Analytics community, you can give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever fine podcasts are sold. If you're watching us on YouTube, hey, subscribe and, of course, hit that notification bell. And you can always share your favorite episodes on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever it is you do social media. Thanks, and I look forward to talking to you in the next episode.